If you watched NFL football in the late 1970s and early 1980s, you heard a phrase whispered in huddles across the league. Defensive backs would grab their safeties before the snap and say one thing: make it a business decision. What does that mean? It means don't go in there. Because tackling Earl Campbell wasn't about football anymore. It was about self-preservation.
Anytime that anybody ever hit Earl Campbell, it always hurt them a lot worse than it hurt Earl Campbell.
You had to get him before he got going. Because once he did, once those 230 pounds, those legendary 36-inch thighs, got moving downhill, it was like stepping in front of a truck. And you couldn't be alone. Entire defenses had to converge just to bring him down.
You just could not tackle him with a hand or an arm now. You can forget that. In fact, you couldn't tackle him with a shoulder a lot of times.
He was the only player in NFL history to win Offensive Player of the Year 3 consecutive seasons to start a career. Not Barry Sanders, not Walter Payton, not even Joe Montana in his prime. This is the story of Earl Campbell, the scariest player the game has ever seen. And if you lived through those days, you remember exactly what that meant. Earl Campbell was born in Tyler, Texas, a place that would earn him a nickname that stuck for life, the Tyler Rose. When Earl turned 11 years old, everything changed. His father passed away. In a lot of ways, football became Earl's way of honoring what his father had taught him. It became his outlet, and eventually, his legacy, his work ethic, the refusal to take shortcuts, the willingness to punish his body for every yard. That came straight from watching his father grind through life. When he first got into organized sports, he was actually a kicker. But something shifted when he realized he shared something in common with one of football's most legendary names, Dick Butkus. Both had severely bow-leg builds, and instead of seeing it as a limitation, Earl modeled his mentality after Butkus. He became someone who sought contact instead of avoiding it. At John Tyler High School in Texas, Earl Campbell spent his junior year as a linebacker. He was good, he was aggressive, he was exactly what you'd want from a defensive player. His coach, Corky Nelson, had a vision. He saw the power, the low center of gravity, the intelligence, and he decided to move Earl to running back. I didn't want to do it at first. I was a linebacker. I'd run up, drop the ball. I just didn't want to carry it. That wasn't me. But what Coach Nelson understood was that Earl's linebacker mentality, that aggressive contact-seeking approach, was exactly what you needed in a power running back.
A running back is good at just being himself. He doesn't have to front it for nobody.
Most backs run away from defenders. Earl ran through them, and then his senior year happened. Earl Campbell rushed for 2,036 yards and 29 touchdowns. He led John Tyler High to a perfect 15-0 record and won the school's first state championship in 43 years. He was named Mr. Football USA for 1973. Now Barry Switzer, the legendary Oklahoma coach who competed against him, said something that stuck with people. The only player I ever saw who could go straight from high school to the NFL. Earl Campbell had offers from everywhere. Oklahoma, Arkansas, all the top programs wanted him. But he chose the University of Texas. And when he showed up on campus, he arrived with almost nothing. His story goes that he carried everything he owned in one grocery bag. One bag. That was his entire wardrobe, his entire life up until that moment. That's the mentality he brought to the Longhorns. Now, before his freshman year even started, Coach Darrell Royal gave him something that would change his approach to the game forever. They gave me film of Jim Brown. I watched it over and over. I just decided that was how I wanted to be. Run over people. Not around them, through them. Jim Brown, the standard by which all power running backs are measured. And Earl Campbell studied him like he was preparing for a final exam. Freshman year, 1974. 928 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, and he was already starting to turn heads. Sophomore year, 1975. 1,118 yards, 13 touchdowns, and he earned All-American honors. This was no longer a prospect. This was a star. By his senior year in 1977, Earl had become a full-blown phenomenon. 1,744 rushing yards, 18 touchdowns. He led the entire nation in rushing. The Longhorns went undefeated in the regular season, and Earl won the Heisman Trophy. That Heisman wasn't just individual recognition. It was validation that he was the most dominant player in college football, period. In those moments after receiving the Heisman, in interviews, you could see something in Earl. A quiet confidence, not arrogance. Just a man who understood exactly who he was and what he was capable of. His teammates from those Texas days talked about what made him different. It wasn't just the physical power, though there was plenty of that. It was his mentality. He approached every play like it was his last. There was no coasting. There was no taking a play off. One thing reporters noticed, he didn't celebrate. After a touchdown, after a great run, he'd hand the ball to the official and get back to the sideline. No showboating, no showmanship, just work. That attitude, that relentless, humble dominance, was the blueprint for everything that came next in his career. May 23, 1978, the NFL Draft. Earl Campbell was the first overall pick, selected by the Houston Oilers. Here's a detail that became legendary in Oilers folklore. The equipment manager told reporters he had to completely rethink the team's supply. His quote was perfect. "We make thigh pads in 4 sizes. Small, medium, large, and Earl Campbell." Earl Campbell's very first NFL play? A 73-yard touchdown reception on his first touch in professional football. But it was one Monday night that absolutely cemented what the NFL had just inherited. It was a classic matchup, the Dolphins' legendary defense against Houston's new weapon. Earl Campbell had 199 yards from scrimmage and 4 touchdowns. 2 of those touchdowns came in the final 7 minutes of the game. By the end of his rookie season, the numbers told the story. He was named Offensive Rookie of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, and All-Pro. The Houston Oilers, led by Campbell's raw power, reached the AFC Championship. When Bum Phillips, the Oilers head coach, was asked about his new star, he didn't mince words. He talked about Campbell's work ethic, his refusal to take shortcuts in the weight room, and his hunger to prove himself every single Sunday. In one season, Earl Campbell had announced himself not just as a good player, but as the most physically dominant force in football. The league had never seen anything quite like it. In 1979, Earl Campbell won the NFL MVP award. Not just the Offensive Player of the Year, the most valuable player, the most important player in the entire league. The following year, 1980, he rushed for 1,934 yards and had 4 games with over 200 yards. In a 16-game season, that's extraordinary consistency at an elite level. Joe Green, the legendary steel curtain defender from Pittsburgh, was asked about facing Earl Campbell. His response, he could inflict more damage than any other back. That was respect. That was one all-time great acknowledging another all-time great, with a healthy dose of wariness about what it felt like to tackle him. Now, here's where the story gets complicated. Despite Earl Campbell's individual greatness, despite being one of the most dominant players in the league, the Oilers kept running into the Pittsburgh Steelers in the playoffs. The Steelers had a legendary defense and the dynasty experience. And every time Houston got there, Pittsburgh was waiting. It wasn't a failure on Earl's part. It was just the reality of football. One man, no matter how great, can't always overcome championship-caliber teams. From 1978 to 1983, no player in the NFL carried the football more than Earl Campbell. No one. That kind of workload, that level of physical punishment, it comes with a price. By 1981, injuries started to accumulate. 1982 and 1983 saw his performance decline. The team around him was changing. Bum Phillips, the coach who understood how to use Earl Campbell, left the Oilers organization. In 1984, Earl Campbell was traded to the New Orleans Saints. It was a fresh start, but it wasn't the same. After the 1985 season, Earl Campbell retired. He was just 30 years old, but his body had aged significantly. The punishment he'd absorbed, the thousands of carries, the collisions, the tackles that sent defenders flying backward, had taken its toll. In interviews from that time, when Earl reflected on the punishment he'd taken and the way he'd played, there was no regret, just pride. Pride in giving everything he had, in never taking a shortcut, in playing the game the way he believed it should be played. I gave it everything. Every single time I stepped on that field, I left pieces of myself out there. That's how you're supposed to play this game. The physical toll of playing the way he played didn't stop when he retired. Earl faced significant health challenges in his post-playing career, spinal issues, difficulty walking, pain that was a constant companion. In a lot of ways, what Earl Campbell did on the football field, the courage, the willingness to absorb punishment, the refusal to give in, That same mentality carried into his life off the field. He faced his health challenges without complaint, without seeking sympathy, just the way he'd faced every linebacker in the NFL. In 2001, Earl Campbell was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It was recognition that had been a long time coming, a validation that his impact on the game was permanent. When you look at the elite power running backs who came after Earl Campbell, Jerome Bettis, Adrian Peterson, Derrick Henry, you're looking at players who studied his film and understood what he represented. Coaches, scouts, and analysts point to Earl Campbell when they're trying to explain what elite power running back play looks like. The low center of gravity, the refusal to dance, the willingness to absorb punishment and keep moving forward, the low pads that allow you to move the pile. In his prime, Earl Campbell was the standard by which power was measured. When scouts were evaluating a big, strong running back, they would say, "He reminds me of Earl Campbell." That comparison, that reference point, has remained constant for over 40 years. He wasn't just the scariest player in NFL history. He was proof that courage and pain often share the same field. That greatness isn't always about being the fastest or the flashiest. Sometimes it's about being the most willing to embrace the physical reality of the game you're playing. That's the legacy of the Tyler Rose. That's why Earl Campbell will always be remembered as the scariest player in NFL history. And if you know someone who grew up during the Earl Campbell era, send them this video. I bet they'll have some stories to share. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Kicker Throne, and see you in the next one.